You know, history is packed with cautionary tales, but some of them aren't just stories, they're warnings. And today, we're diving into one of the most powerful ones out there, the shockingly fast collapse of the British Empire and the chilling parallels it holds for the United States right now. Just let that sink in for a second. An empire that ruled a quarter of the entire globe, whose currency was the undisputed king for over a century, brought to its knees. Not by a massive war, not by some big revolution, but basically by a phone call from its creditor. And that moment? That was the Suez Crisis of 1956.
And this is the number that should really stick with you. 11. 11 days. That is all it took for the illusion of Britain's superpower status to completely, utterly shatter. And it tells us something absolutely crucial. Empires don't always fade away slowly. Sometimes they just fall right off a cliff.
Now, let's be really clear here. The Suez Crisis wasn't the cause of Britain's fall. Nope. It was the single brutal moment that ripped the mask off and exposed decades of hidden decay. The empire was already a hollow shell. Suez was just the final push that made the whole thing crumble for everyone to see. So to really understand how a collapse can happen that fast, we have to rewind the clock. We need to look at the slow unraveling that Britain's leaders just chose to ignore year after year. It's a classic story of pride, of prestige, and a total refusal to face the facts.
So check out this timeline. It shows you exactly how the rot set in. After World War I, Britain flips from being the world's bank to being its biggest debtor, owing huge sums to the US. But instead of adjusting to that new reality, they doubled down on pride. In 1925, they pegged their currency, the pound, back to gold at its old, powerful pre-war rate. An act of pure ego that just strangled their economy. Fast forward to the end of World War II, and the country was, for all intents and purposes, completely bankrupt.
And right here, this gets to the absolute core of the mistake. Even though all the numbers were screaming that they were broke, they just kept up appearances. They kept these expensive military bases all over the globe, funded an empire they couldn't possibly afford, and paid for the whole shebang with borrowed money. They literally chose the illusion of power over actual financial health. Okay, so now we're gonna pivot, because that same playbook of mistakes, that toxic mix of denial and debt, is being repeated by the United States right now with what a lot of experts are calling, well, startling precision. I mean, really think about it for a second. A global power living on its past reputation, acting as the world's policeman with money it doesn't have, and flat out refusing to acknowledge its own deep economic problems. Let's look at the direct comparisons, because they are spooky. So let's start with the big one, debt. After World War II, Britain's debt was a mind-blowing 200% of its GDP. Today, America's is rocketing towards 120%, and it's accelerating like crazy. To put that into perspective, the US government is borrowing $7 billion every single day, not to build something new, but just to keep the lights on. Then you've got the cost of projecting power all over the globe. Just like Britain kept up an empire it couldn't afford, America is basically policing the world with a credit card. We spend more on our military than the next 9 countries combined, and we fund this massive global footprint, you guessed it, by going deeper and deeper into debt. And here is the third parallel, and it's a huge one, forcing other countries to use your currency. Britain made its colonies use the pound, which helped prop it up. The US has had the petrodollar system, which for decades has basically forced the world to buy oil using US dollars. But here's the thing, that system is starting to crack, with major countries like China and Russia actively trying to get away from the dollar.
So you add all this stuff up, the insane debt, the military overspending, the weakening grip on the world's currency, and you start to see a picture forming. A picture of America heading straight for its own version of 1956, its own Suez moment.
And you gotta remember, the final fall is never slow and gentle. It happens just like they say, gradually, then suddenly. For Britain, there were decades of warning signs, but the leaders just ignored them, convinced that things would just work out. And then one crisis hit, and a century of global dominance was over in 11 days. This number right here, this is a flashing red light on the dashboard. $1 trillion. According to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2026, that is how much the US government will be spending every single year just on interest payments for the national debt. And that $1 trillion in interest means we will soon be spending more money just paying for our past debts than we spend on our entire national defense budget. That is the literal definition of an unsustainable path. It's the point where the debt starts to eat the nation alive. So when this system finally breaks, it's not some abstract thing you read about in the news. The collapse of a global reserve currency is a devastating, life-altering event for ordinary people. It's exactly what the citizens of Britain went through firsthand. When the pound collapsed, British families watched their life savings get wiped out. The cost of anything imported, which was a lot, shot through the roof. The standard of living they had always taken for granted just vanished. If the dollar falls, everything America imports, which is almost everything we buy, is going to cost a fortune more. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, interest rates would go to the moon. The comfortable American lifestyle could become a memory. You know, it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking America is special, that the basic laws of economics don't apply to us. But this quote is such a powerful reminder. Every single fallen empire in the history of the world believed the exact same thing. They all thought their reputation, their power, their specialness would somehow save them. It never does.
So the real question isn't if America will face its own Suez moment, but when. The warnings are flashing everywhere, just like they were for Britain. The math is undeniable. The clock is ticking. This history leaves us with a pretty stark choice. Are we going to learn from it, or are we simply doomed to repeat it?